This is Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Outside the United States, it was little known until last year. On April the 16th, 2007, one of its undergraduates brought Virginia Tech to international fame. This student, Sung Hui Cho, entered a residence block at around 7 a.m. He went to the 3rd floor. There, he shot a young girl and another student who came to help. Unnoticed, the killer returned to his room. Methodically, he rearmed himself and changed his clothes. Then he posted a package containing video clips and photos from nearby Blacksburg. It was addressed to NBC television. On his return to campus, he went to a classroom building, Norris Hall, chain shut the doors, and calmly embarked on the worst mass shooting in modern American history.
He didn't speak at all. He was completely silent the whole time. I didn't even think he looked of age to be in college. I was surprised he ended up being 23.
Once I sort of came out of that initial shock, I dove underneath my desk, and somewhere in that, maybe 3 to 4 seconds, he had shot me, just once in my arm.
I did open my eyes a couple times that first time he was in the room, and I just remember kind of seeing him walk around. He was really calm, stone-faced, no expression.
He maybe fired 20 shots total and went down the hall to the next class. And at that point, our class was just decimated. Nobody was moving, nobody was screaming. It was just this overwhelming smell of gunpowder in the air. You could almost see it. It was like darkness had fallen on the room.
I think I realized that it really couldn't have been fake because the guy to my left, not only was he shot multiple times in the torso, he puked because of the pain, I imagine.
I remember thinking when he was shooting everybody, what a coward. He thinks he's doing a noble thing, and he thinks he's being like a big shot or something by killing people, but these people are defenseless.
Only 11 minutes after the start of the rampage, the police broke into Norris Hall. Cho heard them enter, put a pistol to his temple, and shot himself. One of the first on the scene was Sergeant Matthew Brannock.
Just that amount of people and the magnitude and the nature of how they lost their life was just overwhelming. When we entered the stairwell, there was already blood running down the steps in a constant stream. When we came to the 2nd floor landing and there were the 2 deceased people there, obviously, you know, the blood or whatever was coming down the steps was from them. Coming down the hallway, it's just all strewn down the hallway. You know, the floor was just painted red, and at that particular point, it's breathtaking. To go from one room where you see several people who have lost their lives in the incident, to go to another room That's twice that many people. You know, at that particular point, you're starting to get a sense of, you know, wow, this is a tremendous incident. What drives somebody, what state of mind gets them to a position to where you can carry out something like this.
That morning, Sung Hui Cho had killed 32 people and injured many more. His was the worst example yet of the recent wave of school shootings. In 1 week alone in 2008, there were 4 such attacks in the US. Why do men like Cho, and it's almost always men, commit such outrages? The Virginia police mounted a massive investigation.
By the end of the first day, we had upwards of 300 people there. By the second day, we had about 450 people there. We've gathered a ton of evidence.
One force, one mission, for justice, freedom!
One of the things that we desperately seek in determining motive and why it happened is some idea about how we can prevent these sorts of things in the future. So having some understanding as to why Cho felt the way that he felt would go toward our ability to be able to stop any sort of event like this.
Initially, the media claimed that Cho's first victim, 19-year-old Emily Hilscher, was an ex-girlfriend, that this was a crime of passion. The police have since dismissed this motive, but they're struggling to find any other.
Somebody today said, well, we can't find any connection between Cho and any of the victims. Thanks. It's really, really frustrating. As we go through our investigation and talking with folks and try to identify what they knew about the people involved, the victims, what they knew about the Cho, the subject that we now know actually committed these horrific tragedies for us. We still at this point haven't learned why he may have done this.
Was Cho then insane? His video sent to NBC certainly seemed delusional.
You have vandalized my heart, raped my soul, and torched my conscience. You thought it was one pathetic void life you were extinguishing. Thanks to you, I die, like Jesus Christ, to inspire generations of the weak and the defenseless people.
On the day of the attack, he had written in red on his arm the bizarre words Axe Ishmael. This was also the name he put as the sender on the package to NBC. Perhaps Cho's killing spree could be explained as a psychotic episode. But his careful preparations were not the spontaneous actions of a madman. Cho purchased his first gun and collected it from a pawnbroker's 2.5 months before the shootings. Five weeks before the shootings, he hired a van in which he taped some of his diatribe. Then he went to nearby Roanoke to purchase a second gun, a more powerful Glock 9mm. practiced shooting at several ranges in the area and continued to buy ammunition. 8 days before the attack, he hired a room at a hotel where he recorded more of his videotape. 6 days later, a man was spotted acting suspiciously in Norris Hall. The doors were found chained shut. The police think this could have been Cho carrying out a rehearsal. He managed all this without drawing any attention to himself. Someone suffering from psychosis would certainly have found this impossible. Even the student who shared a room with Cho noticed nothing abnormal in his behavior.
I had no indication that something like this was coming. Really no indication of any kind of like crazy tendencies at all. He just seemed like a shy, antisocial person.
If Cho wasn't mad, what then drove him to commit his terrible crime? In the video statement Cho sent to NBC, he gave his reasons.
Do you know what it feels like to be spit on your face and have trash shoved down your throat? Do you know what it feels like to dig your own grave? Do you know what it feels like to have your throat slashed from ear to ear? Do you know what it feels like to be torched alive?
Cho's justification for mass murder seemed to be the innumerable hurts that he'd suffered. But no one ever witnessed Cho being persecuted.
I have no recollection of ever seeing anyone like attack him in either like verbally or physical or anything like that.
In the year I lived with him, and then the year after I lived with him and saw him, I never saw him picked on. Nobody ever bullied him, pushed him around.
You had everything you wanted. Your Mercedes wasn't enough, you brats. Your golden necklaces weren't enough, you snobs. Your trust fund wasn't enough. Your vodka and cognac weren't enough. All your debaucheries weren't enough.
Cho claimed to be punishing a decadent and corrupt community. But Virginia Tech is no rich kid's playground. It's a state-funded institution where candidates get in on merit.
Virginia Tech's a normal school. We're not all driving Mercedes, and everybody's normal here, and there's no like people, we're not running around, you know, in hardly any clothes and just drinking all the time, you know.
It's said that the child is father to the man. So if Cho wasn't being bullied by rich college kids, can we trace the origins of his bitterness back to hurts he suffered in his childhood? This is Centerville, a well-to-do commuter suburb of Washington, D.C. It's home to a sizable Korean population. Cho's family is of Korean origin. When he was 8, he had come to the US with his parents and elder sister. His family may not have been wealthy, but they owned a $400,000 house. Not what you'd expect from some of the comments in Cho's video. Cho was no product of the slum or ghetto. But further clues about his childhood are hard to uncover. Understandably, Cho's family have kept a low profile since the attack.
People have a choice. Either you're good, either you're bad.
Susan Colohan was a family acquaintance who used to cut Cho's hair.
But he never speak. So I asked him, what kind of haircut you like? He never answered. So then Dad said, why don't you answer Lady? Ask you, how'd you like your haircut? And then he still don't answer. He just look at me like that.
All the time for 2 years?
Yeah, hardly speak any. I asked my mom, you know, I say, did he talk any? She say, yes. When sisters around and they talk. He don't speak, it don't mean he's a bad. Because he don't speak.
Children can be cruel. Perhaps then this quiet Korean boy was picked on at school. This is Sung Hui Cho's high school. It's a large institution with 3,200 students. It's in the top 50 high schools in the whole of America and has the proud motto, United in Excellence, Committed to Achievement. Cho's reserve made a lasting impression on his classmates.
I always saw him walking the hall by himself.
My memories of him are being alone, being isolated. More importantly, though, just being pretty invisible. Nothing, you know, a person that no one really noticed.
Cho sat immediately next to me. I just remember he was really, really quiet. And we used to try to like, okay, let's try to get him to interact. And hey, so what are you doing this weekend? Are you going to the movies? Do you have a girlfriend? Like just asking any questions that we would ask any other high school guy.
He would communicate with us either with a head nod or, I described it as a grunt. At the end, he did say a few words to me, really quiet, kind of drawn out.
I don't want people to see him as a bad guy. I think that he was a very lonely guy. He was a good guy, at least for as long as I knew him.
Cho may have been solitary, but just as at university, there doesn't seem to be evidence that he was persecuted.
I never saw him being bullied, persecuted, anybody, doing anything.
At no point did I witness any type of persecution of Song. I've never heard of him being beat up, or I've never actually witnessed him being verbally attacked.
But Cho's school was concerned about his withdrawn behavior. They told his parents that he needed therapy. So, at the age of 13, he was taken to the Center for Multicultural Human Services. It's a charity that offers help to ethnic minorities. Cho went there for 4 years. Dr. James Griffith was his supervisory counselor.
I think the thing that was most notable that I always have remembered was the pain of his shyness. No eye contact from the nodding. He would break out in his sweat, that he would seem to really freeze, that he really was unable to respond. Really a palpable pain, just with his anxiety, if any question was put to him.
Cho's inability to communicate was so severe that he was given art therapy. This is usually used for much younger children, but it meant he didn't have to speak.
It certainly provided one point of human contact, one person that he could be with some ease, without high demands, that could be responding to him every week at least for that hour.
But then something happened that revealed another aspect of Cho's personality. At the age of 15, he displayed a disturbing new interest.
Shortly after the Columbine shootings, he wrote an essay at school that alarmed his teachers. There was no threat against anyone, but he did talk about identifying with them.
Cho was identifying with Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the high school killers who had massacred 13 before shooting themselves. This fascination with Columbine would stay with Cho. In the package he sent to NBC on the day of his killings, he included a letter. According to the broadcaster, it expresses admiration for martyrs like Eric and Dylan.
His therapist decided that they needed a psychiatric consultation. She was concerned that he was depressed. She was concerned that he might be having suicidal thoughts. So we did a psychiatric evaluation and diagnosis of selective mutism and possible major depression were made.
Selective mutism sufferers can speak, but have such severe social anxiety that they withdraw in certain situations and will not communicate.
Children with selective mutism have difficulty socially, emotionally, and possibly academically. When these children are left untreated, this completely affects their self-esteem, their self-worth. They often are very lonely individuals. They can be very sad at times. Many individuals feel very frustrated over the loneliness, over their inability to engage with other people. What sound that makes. And if you push air through the teeth, that's a s. Very good. But what's important to understand is there's no link between selective mutism and violence. And what was going on with Cho was a very complex situation.
By the time Cho's condition was diagnosed, he was a profoundly damaged young man. Save for occasional conversations with his sister, Cho had hardly spoken in his life. Why then had his parents not sought treatment sooner? Certainly roommate Andy Cook was struck by what he felt was a coldness between Cho and his parents.
It wasn't typical family interaction. They just dropped him off, waved goodbye, and that was it. No hugs, no call us, we'll call when we get home, or any of those normal interactions that a family has. I've never seen anyone that be that far away from their family.
Perhaps there are clues in South Korea, where Cho was born and lived till he was 8. This humble ground floor flat in Seoul was home to Cho, his eldest sister, and his parents. Some of Cho's family still live nearby.
애가 점잖하다고 그랬거든. 말을 잘하는 그래서 쳐도 그런 병신인 줄 모르고 애가 순한 줄만 알았지.
한국에서는 어른들 앞에서 말 많이 안 하는 게 좋은
그럼.
거잖아.
얼마나 그 가슴이 아프겠느냐 이런 생각이 나도 계속 납니다. 그리고 그런 그 부모들이 얼마나 괴로워하겠느냐 이런 생각이 이제 나고 죄송하게 생각한다. 그쪽에도 가만보면 말이 없어. 그러니까 많은 아이가 그저 조그만 때도 말이 없으니까 이게 죽어서 그런가 보다. 공부 잘한다니까 그럼 좀 똑똑한 놈인가 본데 이렇게 생각하고 그랬는데 가신 마리아님 기뻐하소서 주님께서 함께시니 일병 드시며 태중하다. 사울이라는 사람도 그냥 일밖에 모르고 자기 식구밖에 모르고 전형적인 한국 사람이야. 주님께서 가신 마리아님 기뻐하소서 아이들 위해서 사는 거지 열심히 이러고.
South Koreans work some of the longest hours in the world. When the family moved to America, they took the habit with them. Both parents were employed in the dry cleaning business, often working 7 days a week. As part of the official investigation into the shooting, Dr. Roger Depew was asked to interview Cho's family. He's one of the world's leading criminal profilers.
If there's any criticism that I could make, it would be that perhaps they were not home enough. Both of them working long hours. There may be consequences to pay if you're not home, especially when you have a child that has special education needs.
Cho may have suffered from lack of attention, but there's no evidence of anything else.
I don't think that there were any more tensions in the family beyond what the young man brought into the equation.
Try and tag the other people.
Dr. Bela Sood also interviewed Cho's family. She's an eminent child psychiatrist.
Oh, so still a long while, huh? In talking with Sang-Hui Cho's sister, son, and the parents, it became very apparent to me that they were very caring and concerned family. Do you think you could find this one? The other important thing to understand is that the father described himself as being an introvert throughout his life. And so he really saw Sang-Hui as very similar to him. The father grew up to be fine, and so they just thought that the son would also grow up to be well.
Even after Cho was diagnosed with selective mutism, he never got the specialist treatment he required.
Well, I think his selective mutism would have benefited most if it had been diagnosed and treated very early. You know, early childhood. You know, by age 13, when he came, there are many developmental stages, many years of childhood in which the assumptions are that it's not only a brain anxiety disorder, but it's also a lifestyle and a whole life that has been organized around it and very hard to change.
Although Dr. Griffith didn't have the specialist resources to treat Cho's selective mutism, he continued Cho's counseling and put him on antidepressants. Slowly, Cho's depression lifted. Then, he asked to stop all treatment.
His parents were kind of in agreement. He wasn't having symptoms. There was not a compelling reason to press that he continue on it. The task of adolescence is independence, autonomy, responsibility, and saying to your parents, I'm ready to take on my own life, is what kids mostly do.
Although Cho was silent and isolated, his interests were those of a normal adolescent. For a high school assignment, he wrote,
I like to listen to talk shows and alternative stations, and I like action movies. My favorite movie is X-Men. Favorite actor is Nicolas Cage. Favorite band is U2.
A year later, in 2004, Cho got into Virginia Tech, 160 miles from home. He was going to study business information technology.
He was very excited. He was the one who wrote his applications up. He received no help for that, and so was very self-directed. And the parents were actually happy for him that he was taking the initiative. And his sister actually said that they were very surprised with how determined he was and that he made it happen for himself.
Cho's medication, counseling, and the support of his family and school had given him a new confidence, even though he still had selective mutism. So how then could this quiet, self-contained young man have become someone even his family said they didn't recognize?
You had 100 billion chances in the ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. The decision was yours. Now you have blood on your hands that will never wash off.
It was during his 3.5 years at university that this shy young man turned into a murderer. Even by American standards, Virginia Tech is a big university. It has some 35,000 students and employees spread over a vast 2,600 acres. It's almost a town in its own right, with its own airport and a sports stadium that holds 66,000 people. For Cho, it was an easy place to get lost.
The school was very concerned about his choice of Virginia Tech because they felt it was a very large school and that he really required the support services.
Cho's high school knew about his selective mutism, his depression, and his fantasies about Columbine, yet they couldn't pass the information on to Virginia Tech. Disclosure of any disability is considered a private matter, and neither Cho nor his parents chose to offer it. Cho's first year studying business passed smoothly enough. He handed in his work like other students, and his grades were good. He blended in, quietly. Then, Cho's ambitions took an unexpected turn. At home for the summer holidays, he felt inspired to write a novel, a work of romantic fiction. His parents and sister Sun were enthusiastic.
What Sun says is that they were actually quite happy for him that he was becoming excited about something, and that he was looking at it as a possible sort of career for himself.
Back at Virginia Tech, Cho pursued his new vocation. He wrote to the then head of English, British poet Lucinda Roy. He'd taken her introduction to poetry course the previous year.
When he inquired about his novel in the first instance, I really did try to discourage him from launching into a career too quickly because I thought he'd be rejected. The novel was a romance in a way about someone seeking love and redemption, really. But, you know, he was not a great writer and he didn't have a great deal of insight, so it was more like a kind of teenage angst thing. I explained to him why it was really important to think about taking many classes over many years and honing your craft.
Early in 2005, Cho decided to hone his craft and switched his course to English. He'd not been good at English at school, being more suited to maths, but Cho had discovered the joys of self-expression. Dr. Roger Depew has studied Cho's writings closely.
Here's something that didn't take social skills and interaction and all of that. This is something you could do solitarily. You know, you could do this by yourself and just let your fantasy out and on the pages, and people would be amazed and astounded by what you produce. Well, it didn't happen that way, you know.
Cho's efforts were not a literary sensation. His grades were poor, and then later that year, a publisher rejected his proposal for a novel.
He gets less than the level of praise or the level of acceptance that he had hoped for. Instead, he gets criticism and even some bad grades. He can't bring it off, you know. And when his son says, lots of people have books rejected, and maybe I could help you, maybe I could edit it, and he wouldn't allow her to read the book. His sister was a very intelligent young woman, a graduate from Princeton University. There's always some kind of sibling rivalry, you know.
Cho's fragile bubble of self-delusion was popped. As 2005 ended, his behavior became increasingly odd, even defiant.
In my British literature class, he sat in the back corner and he didn't introduce himself as anything but question mark. And of all the questions the teacher prompted when she asked him to introduce himself, that was the only one he answered. First, Cho just seemed shy to us, but once he really went out of his way to make sure that nobody could interact with him, it did come off as arrogant. When he came into the class, he would keep his head down and walk straight to his seat. He would just sit back there and do nothing. I tried to say hi to him once, he didn't respond, and if anybody else said anything to him, he didn't respond to them either. And when the class was over, he would leave without running into anybody, talking to the professor, anything. He's the most antisocial person that I've ever met.
Professor Giovanni got in touch with me, I believe by email and also verbally, to let me know that she didn't wish to teach this student that she had in her class anymore. She was very concerned about him, and that he'd been rude, she felt, and that something that he'd written seemed disturbing to her. So I wrote to him, and I recognized the name, and I realized I'd had him before. And he walked in, and he had a cap that was pulled down very low over his eyes and sunglasses on. It's funny because a lot of people have talked about how he wanted to escape attention, but I think that he really wanted to be noticed in a way that to me was disturbing.
Lucinda Roy told Cho that he'd been excluded from class and that she would teach him herself.
Then he left the room, but he was so sad, it seemed to me, that I ran after him and gave him a copy of one of my books and just said, here, this is for you, would you like to read that? And it seemed to me that he was crying.
The two of them met several times. Although these were tutorials, Dr. Roy encouraged him to go to counseling and tried hard to understand him.
I would ask him a question, and he would take between 10 to 20 seconds to respond. When you're waiting for someone to respond, it is a very, very long time. And then when he would respond, it would be in a whisper, a voice that was rather like this, that you could hardly hear. And he would always speak like that. I did ask him whether or not he was depressed, and he did say that he was. And I asked him whether he was lonely, and he did say that he was. He said that he had no friends, and that that was very difficult. But as we got talking, he seemed to be pretty relaxed with me in many ways, and we would talk about a lot of different things. It seems to me ironic that the condition that he seems to have suffered from, I've now learned, is selective mutism, because it did seem very selective to me in the sense that he chose when he would speak, and he could speak with very eloquently if he wanted to. But he could also be very silent when he wanted to, and he seemed to use that silence in much the same way as he used his sunglasses and his hat, both as a way of hiding behind this persona he'd built, this mask he'd built, but also as a way of intimidation, of making sure that you knew that there were things about him you couldn't know. There's always a very dangerous combination with young writers where they are both very, very insecure and incredibly arrogant. He seemed to have both of those things.
Andy Cook was one of Cho's dorm mates that year. He went out of his way to befriend him.
I'd talk to him a lot, but never get anything back, and that'd be quite frustrating. But finally, one Friday, we asked him if he wanted to go to a frat party with us, and he agreed. From what I could tell, that was his first time being around that type of environment. As the night went on, he drank more and got a little more open with us, told us about his imaginary girlfriend, and he called her his imaginary girlfriend. She called him Spanky, and he called her Jelly. We went back to a friend of mine's dorm and sung. It kind of goes without prompting, you know, you want to see something cool, and that was really unusual for him to initiate conversation. And he pulled out a knife and just started stabbing the carpet, kind of slow and deliberate. I guess he was trying to grab attention.
Cho was now assuming a range of personalities, including that of Question Mark, the pseudonym he'd used in his English class.
Question Mark, he said, was his brother. And there was a Facebook profile to go along with this, and he was really obsessed with being cool on this profile. Put this picture of this weird figure, a question mark blocking the face. Said he lived on the 6th floor of Cochrane, which wasn't possible. There's only 5 floors, and he was in room 666. And he's got this girlfriend that lives in outer space and travels on a spaceship.
As Cho began to feel comfortable in Andy Cook's company, he started to ring his newfound buddy.
I guess he built a rapport with me. When he called me, he would either say, this is question mark or this is sung. He would make sure you know. And if he said this is question mark and you know, you kind of play along, but eventually you get tired of it and you go, I know this is you, Sung. And he's like, no, this question mark, Sung's brother. And he was always very adamant about it being his brother.
Adopting different personas is very common with individuals who don't feel very centered and don't have a sense of who they are. These talks about having a twin brother or him being a question mark reflect the ambivalence that he probably felt about himself, and the twin brother probably a reflection of more the ideal self that he wanted to be.
Cho also started to indulge in games of a more voyeuristic nature.
He sat down with us and there was a group of girls next to us, and all of a sudden we see a flash and he had taken a picture, and these girls are all looking at us, you know, kind of annoyed. Later on that progressed into him taking pictures of people I know. And finally one day I was in my room and I see a flash and I turn around and sure enough someone's there taking a picture. So I decided this is another one of his games that I was going to put a stop to. Went up to him and took a picture of him, and he was not happy about that. Kept wanting to see that picture. He had to see that picture. So I finally deleted it, and that ended that, and he was happy.
Cho's selective mutism was subtly transforming. He was no longer as shy as he once was.
There's many individuals as they get older that have selective mutism. The social anxiety starts to go away, but their conditioned and reinforced mute behavior persists. Individuals learn to live in that kind of a world, and that's how people see them, and that's how they see themselves.
Cho was showing a new boldness, but his personality was so distorted that any attempts to socialize backfired.
There was one occasion he went to a girl's room. He was wearing sunglasses and a hat. He goes, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am?" And she obviously didn't, and she became very frightened, threatened to call the police, which she did. Later on that night, around 12 or 1 o'clock, I hear pounding on my door. Virginia Tech police, you know, open up, and they asked where question mark was.
The police spoke to Sung Hui Cho for half an hour and left him.
He was obviously very upset with this girl. He told me he wanted to go look in this girl's eyes and see if she was cool, and all he saw was promiscuity, and he talked about her being a whore and stuff.
But this incident didn't stop Cho making unwanted approaches to another girl. She also called in the police, and again, they cautioned him. Cho contacted Andy Cook.
He's like all upset, and he goes, "I might as well kill myself now." He obviously was a loner and didn't have much to live for, sadly. Maybe he would try and pull something, so we decided to report it, and the police came and took him away.
Cho was taken into custody. He underwent a commitment hearing that found him a danger to himself. He was detained overnight at a local hospital. After a 15-minute examination in which he denied any suicidal or homicidal thoughts, he was released with a court order that he obtained treatment as an outpatient. But Cho never complied with the order, and no one followed up to check. After that, Cho no longer confided in Andy Cook, increasingly isolated. A poem he wrote reveals his state of mind.
This thing, my life, all an agony of hell, of torture, and years of bludgeoning torment, tiny nuisances. The disgust eyes, dirty frowns, and red fingers pointing at me, feeling all the patheticness and humiliation. Good Christ, rip me apart, tear me to shrivels, eat me to help me see a better day and salvage this decaying thing from myself.
But if Cho's writings express self-loathing, they also reveal great anger.
When a person writes things, especially if they reflect the fantasies that he has, it gives us a better understanding of his mindset and his thought processes. I have a couple here that I think that are of value and interesting. One is called Mr. Brownstone. It's a play.
Can't believe we got in using the fake ID.
In this play, the hero John and his two teenage friends illegally get into a casino. Together they bemoan their lot.
After a long day at school, we just want to be left alone.
There's like no safe place for us to hang out. We can't hang out in front of the grocery store. We can't hang out at the park. We can't hang out in the street. The only place where we're safe from that him is behind the shitty dumpster.
Mr. Brownstone. I'd like to kill him.
In many of his writings, there are other peers that are with him. I think that shows the tremendous desire that he has to fit in, that he would like to have friends.
Aren't you guys a little too young to be here?
And even if he has to suffer, he would like to suffer with his friends.
Is it me, or do you smell evil in here?
Not just evil, but old, too.
We're rich! No more Mr. Brownstone! No more Mr.
When they win a fortune at the slot machine, their teacher, Mr. Brownstone, who's found them in the casino, pretends the winnings are his.
This is mine. Mine! These 17-year-old kids pushed me over when they saw that I won. These disrespectful hooligans.
What you have here is a pretty good blueprint of what's going on in Cho's mind. You know, that this is what he's up against in society. That these are the injustices, and that he can't win. And that it's hopeless, and that even if he wins, somebody takes it away. And so there's a great need at the end of this. You know. There's a great desire for vengeance.
Now, come on, son. Give me a chance.
In Richard Macbeef, another of Cho's plays, the hero is once again a teenager named John.
Let me guess.
He too is oppressed, this time by his stepfather who's trying to seduce him. John's response is forceful.
There, mister. No, Dick. You shut the hell up and listen to me.
You better watch
me what? You want me to stick it up your ass? Huh?
Now that's enough!
Cho could never do this. He was never able to, according to his parents and his teachers, he was never able to have this kind of a strong response.
Must kill Dick. Must kill Dick. You don't think I can kill you? Gotcha. Got one eye. Got the other eye.
And it says toward the end of this fantasy, Dick, you don't think I can kill you? Gotcha. Got one eye, got the other eye. You know, you see, the more specific a fantasy is, the more dangerous it is.
All you do for my mom is this honey poo shit. Honey poo, honey poo. Prematurely ejaculating piece of dick shit. Motherfucking McBeef.
How dare you talk to your stepfather like that?
Eat this, you giant tree trunk piece of ass.
Now that's enough!
The play ends with the stepfather killing the young anti-hero.
There are destructive fantasies in all of the writings. Those destructive fantasies have to do with destroying others and with self-destruction.
Time and again, Cho's protagonists battle against oppression. The fantasy of victimhood is always more appealing than the reality of failure. " 2007 was to be the year of Cho's graduation. Everyone was discussing future jobs and prospects. Reluctantly, so was Cho.
As with many Asian families, the notion of not having employment is always very concerning to parents. So I did get that sense in the interview with them that they asked him, what are you going to do after your graduation? Do you need to go to graduate school? And he said, no. Okay, so should we find some work for you, or do you need help with that? And he said, no. So they probably were beginning to wonder what was going to happen, and so was he.
But the market for mediocre English majors is never very promising, and Cho couldn't come to terms with his own failings. Instead, he came up with a new fantasy that would end his misery and bring him a blaze of glory. A persona he called not Question Mark or Spanky, but Axe Ishmael.
He could not succeed. So he said, okay, how can I leave a mark in a way which no one can take away from me? And how do you do it in a way which would grab the world's attention? He was sort of moving away from this victim role of someone who the world did not consider sort of strong into creating a sort of a macho image for himself, donning this persona where the aggression towards himself and aggression towards the world are put together, forms this final act of revenge on the world.
He lays out this plan and his role in the plan. He begins to feel much better about himself. He begins to see himself as a person who can pull this off. He can do this.
Cho had captioned the photos he sent to NBC, and some of these photos with their accompanying text have been released, with the swearing excised.
Oh, the happiness I could have had mingling among you hedonists, being counted as one of you, only if you didn't the living out of me. You could have been great. I could have been great. Ask yourself what you did to me to have made me clean the slate. Are you happy now that you've destroyed my life? Now that you've stolen everything you could from me? Are you happy now? All the you're giving me, right back at you is hollow points. Don't you just wish you finished me off when you had the chance? Don't you wish you could have killed me? Let the revolution begin.
Once the fantasy gets to a certain point, they're all the enemy. Doesn't really matter specific names anymore. You're striking out against society, against a situation that would not include you, would not allow you full participation.
And so it was that after months of planning and playing at being a killer, Cho left his room on a cold April morning. He loaded his weapons and went to West Ambler Johnston Hall, and 2 hours later to Norris Hall to commit his acts of murder.
It was a snowy Monday. Our class was about 9 o'clock, 9:30, and so I remember waking up and seeing the flurries outside, so I started thinking, okay, time to get dressed, get to class, and a friend of mine picked me up and took us in, and we were already late, of course. People are just kind of talking about the weekend and plans. Teacher hands us a worksheet. After about 20 minutes, we started hearing loud bangs I'm not Pops. So at first you didn't really think much of it. It's like, okay, this is kind of strange. And then it got closer and closer and faster and faster. Our professor kind of peeped out. She's a very calm woman, but her face kind of got this alarmed look. She closed the door, said, "Call 911." 2 other students jumped up with her and barricaded the door. This whole time you're in complete shock, and I remember thinking, like, what's going on? This can't be real. We all dropped to the floor and got the quickest protection we could find. That's when he came in and he pushed right through a couple of desks, pushed them out of the way, and I remember I was under the desk, hunched under it, and I looked to the left, and at this point I'm still thinking that this is some kind of drill, maybe. And yeah, he started shooting. I went straight down the aisles. Very planned, very deliberate, very determined. No emotion at all. Every so often when he would fire it, they'd be accompanied by a yelp or a scream. I remember a bullet hit the wall 2 inches above my head. I remember looking up and the powder from the wall brushed my arm and I could smell the debris, and I was just like, this is real. It was all pretty much a blur after the first bullet hit and the searing pain. I was hit several times. One was in my back, my lower back. One was in my buttock. Then my foot was the third one. And that was a ricochet. I think it went straight through. My body had never felt so cold. I remember my throat was dry. I was just kind of gasping for air the entire time. He left our room at some point. I remember hearing people in our classroom just whispering, "Hush, don't move, don't talk." I remember hearing a lot of coughing and gurgled noises. Cell phones started going off. But it was pretty quiet for the amount of pain and suffering that was going on. He came back a couple of times, make sure people weren't alive. Once the first police knocked, it was like, okay, we're gonna get saved. They crashed to the door. I remember seeing the black SWAT team. And they looked around. One of the policemen said, "We've got a lot of black." And I remember thinking, well, what does that mean? And then he went to the girl next to me and called that a black, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, black means they didn't make it.